Canada's country gentleman, Tommy Hunter. He just told me he did his first public performance at age 9. He started with the CBC in 1956 playing his guitar. By 1960 he had his own radio program, The Tommy Hunter Show. 1965 the Tommy Hunter Show moved to television, and from 1965 to 1992 he invited Canadian families into his home, and that's where we went for our entertainment. Not only did Canadians come to our home, but he was also a place for Canadian talent to get started. Names like Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, the Judds, Alanis Morissette, all in their early years passed through the Tommy Hunter Show and got a boost from it. He's obviously in the Canadian Country Music Hall of Fame. He's got the Order of Canada. He's got 2 Junos. He's got an Emmy. He's on tour. He's been on tour since 1992 when the show closed. And recently, he announced that next year, on his birthday, in his hometown, will be the last show. Say it ain't so. Tommy Hunter. And Mary Lou Finley. Mary Lou Finley. Radio and broadcast journalist. She started at the CBC in Ottawa as a host of a magazine show in 1970. Moved to Toronto in 1975 to be the co-host of Take 30 with Paul Soles. In 1975, that was 1975. She was the host of Finley and Company. She went to the other guys, CTV, for a couple of years to do Live It Up. But she came back and with Barbara Frum started The Journal in 1981, there till 1988. Was then the host of Sunday Mornings for 6 years, Now the Details, and from 1997 to 2005 was the host of As It Happens. Talk about iconic shows, eh? She's touched all of those shows from 1970 to now. Mary Lou Finley. All 3 of these icons have spent more than 30 years in our homes via the airwaves of CBC Radio Canada. So we're going to get their perspective on how far we've come. Now, I don't do this for a living, and we have, one of the great showmen of the country and 2 of the scariest interviewers of the country, so I'm going to let you ask all the questions. We have a microphone there, and there's another one coming. There's another one right here. So anyone who wants to ask a question, please do so. I'll get it started just by asking each of them to tell us about an iconic moment for them on the CBC airways. What comes to mind when you think of CBC at its best? And we'll start with Betty Kennedy.
Well, Front Page Challenge, as you can imagine, began way back in the 50s, and it lasted for 38 years, and I was lucky enough to be there for 34. You will all remember very well, I imagine, Toby Robbins, who was such a beautiful, wonderful performer and actress, and she left after 4 years to go to England and become an actress over there. So that's how they did on-air auditions, and I wound up with the lucky chair. And it was a delight to sit there for so long next to Gordon Sinclair, who has turned out to be a very good friend. Frankly, he always reminded me a little bit of my grandfather, but he was always exciting and interesting. Iconic moments. Well, I think I can remember one very, very well, because our producer came into us in the green room and he said, I want you all to make a note of what you are wearing right now for this show that we're doing, and make sure that you have that available, because we may come out of here with only half a show. And if that is the case, we're all going to have to come back and do another half. Well, it was a very strange kind of thing for him to say. He came back again and he said, I guess I'd better explain. We have a guest challenger for the second half of the show. But that challenger is currently out in the middle of Yonge Street directing traffic. Well, you can tell, we could already imagine the number of cocktails or the drinking that had gone on to, and now he never made any reference to the guest because we never knew who the guests were going to be. He came back in and he said, "We may be able to go, but don't forget, you've got to remember the wardrobe." He came back a third time and he said, "It's the kind of a guest that we're not going to be able to get another time, so we're going to go ahead." Well, by this, and he said, "We'll start with you. Betty, we're going to start with you." And I thought, thanks very much. Because I knew that we were going to be dealing with someone who was difficult or, well, problematic. It turned out to be a woman, and it turned out to be a relative of Churchill, and the story was Churchill's death. But we had one other instance, not unlike that, when we had some Russian guests who didn't understand the setup of the show, where you come in and you sit around for quite a long time before you actually do the show. And when we got ready to do the show, they had walked out. They thought that we had lost interest and they had to go chasing them up to come back to do the show. So those were a couple of nerve-wracking, nail-biting episodes, but there were lots that were very great fun. So that's...
Tommy.
Well, let me think. I was sitting here while Betty was talking, trying to think of some of the funny things that have happened on our show, and I can't think of anything. The show was always, yes, well, it wasn't always perfect, but we did make mistakes. We'd go back. We always had a rule that we would try to do our show when we were taping it from commercial to commercial. And we did that for a couple of reasons, because it always felt that it was done live. The guests would be standing, getting ready to go on, and they'd say, "If I make a mistake, can we do it again?" I said, no, this is it, partner. If you're going on, make sure you get it right, because they'll keep it in the show. So many of the guests that would come on were recording artists, and you would look down and their pants would be shaking because they hadn't done that much television. But we had a wonderful time all throughout the years that we did our show, and we stayed on the air for a lot of years thanks to you folks, and that was the reason why we lasted as long as we did. We thank you for taking the time to tune us in. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tommy. Mary Lou.
You're right about the audience. The CBC has the greatest audience in the country, there's no question, for radio and television. Give yourselves a hand. Betty, as you were talking, I was remembering Gordon Sinclair too, and his question, his perennial question, how much do you make? Do you remember that? You can get away with that today.
You know that I'm glad you worded it that way, because he was very sensitive about that. Because people kept saying that, he always asked how much money they had. He asked how much money they made. He was always interested in what a contract paid, what a job paid.
What he should be asking for in his next negotiation.
That's what he wanted to know.
Things that, well, as with Tommy, my experience was mostly free of catastrophe, I'm happy to say. I was always backed up by a really good group of producers, except in the very, very early days when I was working at CBOT in Ottawa, my first television program, and this would never happen today, believe it or not. I walked in off the street and asked for a research job in a new television show that was going on the air in the afternoon. And I thought it would be fun to do public affairs. I had no journalism degree. I had no stage experience. I had got a degree in English and French literature, and then I'd worked in the War Museum for 3 years. And So the producer said, oh, the researcher's job is filled. How would you like to host it? I'm serious. Talk about chances, huh? Serendipity. So naturally, being young and stupid, I said, sure, why not? Can't be too much to that. Actually, it's not true that I was that confident. What I thought to myself is, first of all, there were 4 hosts. I didn't have to carry the can alone. 2 very experienced men, Harry Elton and Bob Gardner, and a young woman, another young woman, and myself. So we had good backup. But I remember thinking, this is the great opportunity, and you have to seize it. Although you're going to make a complete ass of yourself in front of, well, many people, no doubt. And I did. But with very understanding hosts and great people to work with and mentor, I learned on the job. It's actually a really good way to learn if you don't get fired halfway through or something. The other thing I wanted to say today was that if it weren't for Mark Starowitz, I probably wouldn't have had my last 20 years in media, because every show I worked on was one he created. So kudos to Mark. You know, Sunday Morning and As It Happens, and the Journal, for that matter. He and Peter Herrndorf put that together. So, and every time we've done anything, we've been held up by you people.
I'm not sure. There we go. One of the things, have you noticed the general things that Betty had talked about and Mary Lou had talked about? The reason that a show is successful, in my estimation, is, Mary Lou said it and Betty said it earlier, it's the crew that you have working. If you have a good producer, good directors, good cameraman, and we were all very fortunate. And the proof of the pudding is why we lasted so long. It's a big thanks, and I've said this every time we do shows. We were one spoke in the wheel. All the other spokes were good producers, good writers, good cameramen, and I was privileged to work with the absolute best. So that's what made the show really successful.
I want to add to that with just a sentence or two that comes from a friend of mine. And he says, when you see a turtle sitting on top of a fence post, you know he didn't get there by himself.
No, when you stay there because you're good at what you do, and you all stay there for a very long time. How does anyone in the room want to have a crack at one of these people? Does anyone want to ask a question? Lady in red there. There's a microphone right to your right.
Okay. The question is for Tommy. Tommy, I remember you way back when I was living in Val d'Or, and I believe you were on CKVD Rwanda. Am I right?
Yeah, where was it again?
Val d'Or.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, not too far from Haileybury. My question is, after that, I traveled across Canada and lost touch with you guys.
Yeah.
Way back then, your group was Tommy Hunter and the Candy King, something like that?
Yeah, I know who you're referring to. You're going back before my show on a program that I was on called Country Hoedown. You remember?
Yeah.
Tommy Common, Marjorie, Norma, and Jean, the 3 Hames sisters, right? King Gannon played the fiddle. You know, he used to play the fiddle and then...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's it. I can't do it as well as he did, but anyway, I'm a lot older. But anyway, yeah, that was Country Hoedown, and that was, who else? Lorraine Foreman was on that show, Gordy Tapp, Cousin Clem.
Did you keep in touch with them? Are they still around with you?
Yeah, I saw the Hames sisters not that long ago. I talked to Gordy about, maybe a month ago. And yeah, I still stay in touch with some of them. Tommy Common unfortunately passed away a number of years ago in Calgary. And And King Ganem passed away. He was out in Western Canada where he passed away in Saskatchewan. So that's it.
Well, thank you very much, and good health.
Thank you. It was a great show, believe me. I spent 9 years. It was a learning. It was like going to school for me.